March 27th, 1977. A thick blanket of fog covered the runway of a small airport on the island of Tenerife. Visibility had dropped to just a few hundred feet. Inside two Boeing 747 jumbo jets, nearly 600 passengers waited patiently, unaware that history was about to change forever. Then came a misunderstood radio transmission. One captain believed he had permission to take off. The other aircraft was still taxiing on the same runway. Seconds later, two of the largest passenger airplanes ever built collided in a massive fireball, killing 583 people and becoming the deadliest aviation disaster in history. But how could such an unimaginable tragedy happen without either aircraft ever leaving the ground? The disaster that unfolded on March 27, 1977, was not caused by mechanical failure, terrorism, or severe weather alone. Instead, it was the result of a tragic chain of seemingly minor events that aligned in the worst possible way. The day began hundreds of kilometers away on the neighboring island of Gran Canaria. A bomb exploded inside the terminal of Gran Canaria Airport, followed by another bomb threat. Authorities immediately closed the airport, forcing dozens of incoming flights to divert. Among them were two Boeing 747 jumbo jets. One belonged to KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, operating Flight 4805 from Amsterdam. The other was Pan American World Airways Flight 1736 from Los Angeles via New York. Both aircraft were diverted to Los Rodeos Airport on the island of Tenerife. At the time, Los Rodeos was a relatively small regional airport. It had only one runway and limited parking space. It was never designed to accommodate multiple Boeing 747 aircraft at the same time. Within hours, the airport became severely overcrowded. Large passenger jets blocked taxiways, forcing air traffic controllers to improvise ground operations. As the afternoon progressed, Gran Canaria Airport reopened. One by one, aircraft prepared to depart Tenerife. But another problem was forming. A thick layer of Atlantic fog began rolling across the airport. Visibility changed from clear to almost zero within minutes. Pilots could no longer see the opposite end of the runway. The control tower could not see the aircraft. Even the two jumbo jets could not see each other. Unlike modern airports, Los Rodeos had no ground radar. Controllers had to rely entirely on radio communication and position reports from the pilots. The KLM aircraft was instructed to taxi to the far end of the runway, turn around, and prepare for departure. The Pan Am aircraft was instructed to taxi along the same runway before exiting onto a taxiway that would clear the runway. Because the taxiways were partially blocked by parked aircraft, both airplanes had to use the active runway itself as a taxi route. It was an unusual procedure, but at the time, it was considered acceptable. As the KLM aircraft reached the end of the runway, Captain Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten turned the massive Boeing 747 around until it faced directly down the runway. Van Zanten was one of KLM's most respected captains. He was also one of the airline's chief flight instructors and appeared in company training materials. His reputation was exceptional. Meanwhile, the Pan Am crew continued taxiing through the dense fog, searching for their assigned exit. Unfortunately, the visibility was so poor that identifying the correct taxiway became extremely difficult. Inside the KLM cockpit, another concern was growing. Dutch regulations limited how long flight crews could remain on duty before mandatory rest periods. Every additional minute on the ground increased the risk that the crew would exceed those limits, delaying the flight until the next day. Captain Van Zanten wanted to depart as soon as possible. Before takeoff, he decided to refuel the aircraft completely, adding thousands of liters of fuel. Although this increased the aircraft's range, it also added valuable time to the delay. Finally, both aircraft were ready. The KLM crew contacted the control tower for departure clearance. The controller issued the route clearance after takeoff, explaining the planned flight path once the aircraft became airborne. However, this was not the same as giving permission to begin the takeoff roll. As the radio transmission ended, Captain Van Zanten advanced the throttles. The enormous Boeing 747 began accelerating down the runway. At almost the same moment, the first officer questioned whether they had actually received takeoff clearance. The captain responded confidently that they did. Meanwhile, inside the Pan Am cockpit, Captain Victor Grubbs and his crew continued searching through the fog for the correct taxiway. They had not yet exited the runway. Realizing the danger, The Pan Am crew transmitted urgently, "We're still taxiing down the runway." At nearly the same instant, the control tower replied, "Okay, stand by for takeoff. I will call you." Unfortunately, both radio transmissions occurred simultaneously. The signals interfered with each other. Inside the KLM cockpit, much of the warning was blocked by radio feedback. The captain heard only fragments of the message. Believing the runway was clear, he continued accelerating. The Pan Am crew suddenly saw bright landing lights emerging from the fog. The KLM aircraft was coming directly toward them. Captain Grubbs immediately turned sharply left, attempting to steer off the runway. At the same moment, Captain Van Zanten pulled back on the control column, trying to lift the aircraft into the air before reaching the Pan Am jet. For a brief moment, it almost worked. The KLM aircraft became airborne, but it had not reached sufficient flying speed. Its tail struck the runway. The lower fuselage slammed into the upper section of the Pan Am Boeing 747. The impact ripped both aircraft apart. Thousands of liters of aviation fuel ignited instantly. A massive fireball erupted across the runway. The KLM aircraft crashed back onto the runway, sliding hundreds of meters before exploding. Everyone on board was killed instantly. The Pan Am aircraft broke apart under the tremendous force of the collision. The front section remained partially intact. Several passengers and crew escaped through holes torn into the fuselage before flames engulfed the aircraft. Airport firefighters rushed toward the explosion, but thick smoke, burning fuel, and scattered wreckage made rescue efforts incredibly difficult. The dense fog that had hidden the approaching aircraft now concealed survivors desperately searching for safety among the flames. When the fires were finally extinguished, the scale of the tragedy became clear. A total of 583 people had lost their lives. Only 61 people, all from the Pan American aircraft, survived. The Tenerife Airport disaster remains the deadliest accident in the history of commercial aviation. Yet, investigators would soon discover that no single mistake had caused the disaster. Instead, it was the fatal combination of poor visibility, airport congestion, radio interference, ambiguous phraseology, and human assumptions that turned an ordinary afternoon into one of aviation's darkest days. The investigation into the Tenerife disaster lasted for months and revealed a painful truth. There was no single mechanical failure, no act of sabotage, and no single person solely responsible. Instead, the tragedy resulted from a chain of small mistakes that aligned at exactly the wrong moment. Investigators concluded that poor visibility, airport congestion, radio interference, ambiguous communication, and human assumptions all played critical roles. One misunderstood phrase, combined with overlapping radio transmissions and the pressure to depart quickly, was enough to cost 583 lives. The disaster transformed aviation forever. Air traffic controllers and pilots around the world adopted standardized English phraseology to eliminate ambiguity. Expressions like takeoff became strictly reserved for actual takeoff clearance, while terms such as departure replaced potentially confusing wording. Crew Resource Management, or CRM, was also introduced, encouraging first officers to challenge captains whenever safety was in doubt, regardless of rank or experience. Today, every commercial flight benefits from the lessons learned on that foggy runway in Tenerife. The disaster remains a powerful reminder that even the most experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes when communication breaks down. In aviation, safety is built not on perfection, but on clear procedures, teamwork, and the courage to question assumptions before it's too late.